What's up, family? This has been an incredibly busy week, and I have a lot of exciting news to share. And I will make sure you join us Sunday, and I'll make sure to fill you in for our Sunday sessions. But today, I want to have a conversation about what's the worst that could happen. What's the worst that could happen if you believed in God and God doesn't exist? This is going to be a good one. Before we jump in, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell. Consider joining our community either on Patreon or right through YouTube. Consider volunteering. We really do need help. And just to say this, there are certain things that money can solve, but money can solve only so many problems. You still really need bodies, hearts, and minds that are committed to moving something forward. And I find myself at a place where I need both money and people, and I kind of like being there. I don't ever want to be in a place where I don't need people. Okay, I say that now. And also, we have merchandise, so feel free to check out that merchandise and see if there's anything in there that kind of matches your swag or your stilo. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so let's jump into this conversation. Often you hear people talk about, like, well, what's the worst that can happen? If I believe in God and God doesn't exist, then I've missed out on nothing. Are you sure about that? To me, that is such a pedantic statement, so childish in its in its query that it has not actually held itself accountable to thinking through the consequences. So before I even jump in my notes, just like off the top of my head, the first thing that I can think of, what's the worst that can happen? The thing that kills me is that people ask that question as if we don't have a history to reflect on. They ask that question as if they're asking this question 2,000 years ago. But literally, when it comes to being what's the worst that can happen, the worst that can happen is the genocide of Native Americans, the slavery of Africans, the robbery of land, the murder of LGBT folk along with Africans. I mean, like, what? Like, literally, what are you saying? Do you know how many children have been abused? I'm going to get into that. So when a person actually asks that question, especially in 2024, when a person asks, what's the worst that could happen if I believed in God and God doesn't exist? Like, are you freaking kidding me? Did you miss the Holocaust? You know, what's the worst that can happen? Like, this shouldn't even be a question that's taken seriously in 2024 because we have, a bouquet of history to determine that, oh, there's a lot of bad things that can happen. Well, I want to jump into a few of those things. To me, one of the worst things that can happen if you believe in God and it turns out that there is not a God, which means that then there is not a heaven and then there is not a hell, then you have absolutely wasted your life in anticipation of another one. Now, the argument that goes here is normally, well, it's not just, well, what happens if I believe in God and there's not one? The disingenuousness of this argument is that it is most likely posed as, what will it hurt me for living a life as a good person? But here is the problem. Here is the rub. The problem is Christians have been able to live off of the propaganda that Christian living equals good living. However, the history does not show that. Christian parents tend to disown their children, which means Christian people tend not to be great parents. I'm not saying all Christians aren't great parents, but I am saying if you're a Christian who is a believer, according to modern standards, if you're trying to raise your child the way that the Bible says to raise your child, then according to modern standards, you're not a good parent. So for me, and this is one who had two bad parents, I don't understand how you can be a good person without even being a good parent. All right, now that's just me. And that's just me. So it's this ideology that Christians, because we perceive Jesus as a good person, that then Christians are good people. That argument could have been appropriate 2,000 years ago. But after 2,000 years of history, we do not have statistical data that demonstrates on any level that Christians are actually good people. And 98% of Christian institutions, and not literally 98% of each institutions, but 98% of the type of institutions, all of those 98% of those institutions or type of institutions are overrun by scandal. Whether that scandal is abuse towards women, abuse towards children, or just an abuse towards humanity altogether. So, no, we do not have a record of Christians being good people. Let me speak from an African American perspective. It was Christians who burned my ancestors. It was Christians who not only hung them, but mutilated them by cutting off their genitals, not just in America, but in America, in Europe, in South America, in Africa, and in Australia. This is a truism, right? And these were all done by Christians. It was the thing that we know as the transatlantic slave trade was sparked by the Catholic Church. And then let's not leave Islam out of this, because prior to the Catholic Church getting in on it, Islam was already running, having a field day with it in East Africa. But then in the late 1300s, early 1400s, the Catholic Church issued the papal bull, which gave them the right to subdue lands and the people of those lands if those people were not believers, which, mind you, are not New Testament beliefs. That you get nothing in the New Testament that gives you that type of authority. Those are all Old Testament belief systems. But that didn't stop with the Catholic Church. Christianity is still doing it today, even with what's going on in Israel and Palestine. So I'm sorry, that was a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I had to hit that because that's the disingenuousness of it is that Christians get to assume that no, we're the good people. And I'm like, where is the evidence that you're the good people? You burned women calling them witches. You're not the good people. But to be clear, Jesus is not a good person. I'm going to do a separate video on this. But if Jesus was alive today, teaching the things that he taught today, there is no moral standard where we would consider him a good guy. He literally called a person a dog because that person was not a Jew. You understand that? Which actually makes Jesus a Jewish supremacist, no different than a white supremacist or a black supremacist or an Asian supremacist, which I'm not exactly sure if they exist. Well, as a sociologist, I'm almost sure. But the point is, so the argument is not whether or not whether or not you're spending your life as a good person, because that has not yet been demonstrated. There's no aspect of Christianity that has been proven or demonstrated to be objectively good or even objectively beneficial. Now, are there some Christian organizations that do good things? Absolutely. Just as there are a lot of drag queens that do good things. And I actually think if we did the data, if we actually ran them numbers up, we'd probably find more drag queens doing good things than we would Christians doing good things by relevant numbers. You see what I'm saying? All right. So one of the worst things that can happen while believing in God, if there isn't a God, is that you waste your life. You literally waste this life in anticipation of another. You literally judge your effectiveness in this life by a life that you have no evidence of, no reason to believe in, and nothing to support this idea. So, yes, if there is no God and you spend your whole life not trying to figure this world out, not trying to contribute to it, not trying to participate in it, then you have absolutely wasted your life. And one of the things that shook me not just out of theism, but even out of silent atheism, is watching how many people around me were absolutely wasting their lives while complaining that other people weren't doing enough for them. The nerve that you are expecting God to handle all of your life's issues while still blaming people for being the root cause of your issues. The dissonance is alarming. I almost said disgusting, but I want it to be nice, right? I try sometimes. So no, wasting your life in anticipation of another one. And the sad thing about it is, if once you die, you don't have a second chance. That's it, as far as we know right now. So once you die, like which makes this thing sound even more stupid to me, because there's like nothing. You have no evidence that there's anything on the other side, and you're literally going to live this one life. To me, this one life is all the eternity that I will ever have. And if that ever changes, I'll be grateful for it. But as of now, I am literally living in eternity. Why not? Or at least the closest thing to eternity that we can know of at this moment. Why not make the best of that? Why not make the most of that? That's kind of my thing. Do the work, do it right, do your best, and do the most. Make the most of your life while you're here. All right, but that's not the only thing. Another thing, as far as the worst things that can happen if God is not real, is that you mistreated other people in service to your imaginary friend. And this is absolutely amazing to me, because outside of the Old Testament, there really is no rationale to mistreat other people. I mean, Jesus does it, but he doesn't tell you to do it, right? So this one is odd to me, but yes, the mistreatment of other people in service to your imaginary friend. Now, as a person, I can say I've lived through some of this. I literally had an aunt call me gay as a child, trying to be derogatory because I wanted an earring when I was 12 years old. And I wanted an earring because Michael Jordan had an earring and other people had an earring. But my aunt, in service to her imaginary friend, decided to say something hurtful, harmful, not only to her nephew, great nephew actually, but also to anybody who identified as gay, all in service to an imaginary friend. Now that's the tip of that iceberg, because let's talk about the countless amount of abused children who are raised by people who believe that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. And what's often been funny about this to me is that these people who do not spare the rod oftentimes do spoil the child in other ways. So it seems like your goal was never not to spoil the child. Your goal was just to have somebody to beat on and to have permission to beat on somebody else, which, believe it or not, is a part of the human condition. If you come from a context where violence was acceptable, then you tend to take on a type of approach of my turnism, of one day it's going to be my turn, which happens a lot with parenting. If you were physically assaulted as a child, guess what you can't wait to do when you become a parent? Physically assault your child. So, yes, one of the worst things that can happen is that you mistreat other people, including your children, because you can't look into the eyes of a child and determine that what I am doing is wrong because a book told me otherwise. Yes. But not only the abuse of children, but also the dehumanization of women, to the point where even in 2024, we have men who think they are in their right mind trying to tell women, you have to submit to me, or that you are lesser than. Are you freaking kidding me? And let's be careful here. It's not just men. And this is one of the things that bothers me in a lot of these conversations, because we literally act like we're not all participants in this. And believe me when I say it is not just men trying to force women to submit, it is other women too. Now, this is coming from somebody from the church context. You can take this to the bank and cash it. It's the church mothers sitting on the front row, literally trying to legislate how other women live their lives according to the decisions that they have made. It's other women who slut shame women and say, oh, you shouldn't wear that because of their Christian beliefs. So no, this is these are things. See, it's not like we're asking the question, what's the worst thing that can happen, as if it hasn't already happened yet. We don't have to pick from the future. All we have to do is pick from the past, to literally look back over the past and say, here's one of those worst things. Here's another one of those worst things. Hey, women being burned at the stake for being accused of for being accused of witchcraft. That's one of those worst things. Africans having their balls and genitals mutilated because they were considered less than human. That's one of those worst things. Like, what the hell are you ignoring to come up to even be able to say that in 2024? But it's not only the abuse of children and the dehumanization of women that extends to our mistreatment of others when you believe in a God and serve that God according to your imagination, but it's also villainizing people who either believe differently or don't believe at all. People who do not participate in your belief, you force them to be a part of your story. So even though they don't believe in a devil, you then make them devilish, so much so that when a great tsunami hit Indonesia, those people had done nothing wrong to any of us that we know, but several Christians in the United States said they deserved it because they were devil worshipers, people who don't even believe in the devil. So you want to talk to me about what's the worst that can happen if you can believe this and it's not true? Well, one of the worst things that can happen is you can watch an absolutely catastrophic event of human life where the death toll of human life is absolutely outrageous, intolerable, and unacceptable, and say, praise God. Yeah, that's pretty damn bad. If you ask me, now, this is just my humble opinion. All right? Others' people view of God has to submit to yours when you buy into that type of delusion, which ultimately means that the freedom that you so want for yourself, the freedom to believe in the things that identify with you, the freedom to believe the things that you've had experiences with, you dare try to rob other people of and say, no, you don't get that right because you have to believe the fairy tale that I believe. I can remember very clearly there was a moment when I was at a gathering where we were doing a mission trip in the projects, and it began to rain, and we began to pray that it would stop raining. And I had a almost like an epiphany of saying, holy crap, the very thing we're doing, we've accused other people of witchcraft for doing. To make that clear, in many Christian circles, we taught that Native Americans were performing witchcraft and superstitious rituals when they had the audacity to believe that by dancing and chanting, they could either make it rain or make it stop rain. But yet here I was as a believer chanting, believing that my chants would have an impact on the weather. Superstition by any other name is still superstition. But then this next thing, it's not just you waste your life in anticipation of another one. It's not just you mistreat others in service to your imaginary. And if you don't believe people do that, just check out my comments. The Christians are amazing. They can't stop themselves from calling me names. They can't stop themselves from trying to force me to believe what they believe. And then if I don't believe what they believe, they want to condemn me to hell. Oh, God's going to get you, buddy. Yikes. All right. So, but not only that, and not only that, but it's also the robbery of personal agency. Now, I speak to this from a member of a community that has been marginalized for a very long time in this country. And what I'm going to say here is probably not going to be popular. But I would say that a major part of that marginalization, surely not all, surely not in the beginning, but if we're considering the past 100 years for sure, a major part of that marginalization has been based on our belief system. Speaking for my community, and because I can't speak for everybody's, and even then, I'm not the thermostat for my community. I'm not the thermometer for my community. So, I don't get to pick everything, but I can just speak from my experience. And I see people who did not do, in my experience, in my specific context, not generalizing, in my specific context, I see people who did not do what they should have done to move their own lives forward because they were believing that God was going to do it for them. And not only were they believing that God was going to do it for them, they were also believing that to try to do it outside of God would be offensive to God. So therefore, you have thousands of people in my community who are afraid to make decisions for their own lives based off of their experiences. They're afraid. They're afraid that if I don't have God's permission. Now, and to be honest here, because I like to be nuanced, I'm not saying that to make them sound like incredible victims. To provide some nuance to that, they are afraid of making decisions to better their lives because that will be offensive to God. But they're not afraid of doing other stuff that's supposed to be offensive to God. Otherwise, you wouldn't have some of the issues you have in my community. So I'm not trying to give anybody a free pass. There is an amazing amount of hypocrisy and dissonance at play here. But what happens is the positive things that happen in your life are completely out of your control. So anybody that comes in your life that was a nice person, oh, God must have sent this person, not I chose to entertain a relationship with this person. Anything good happens to you in life, God must have made this happen, not I worked hard to get here. You take on a Jesus take the wheel mentality, where you literally begin to believe that there are things that are too hard for you to tackle. And sure, there are some things that are challenging, but a lot of the things that people say they can't take, I'm like, how? Outside of real you know, diagnosed issues, outside of that, like, how can you not take this? How can you not survive this? How can you not make it through this against the backdrop of history? Now, and again, perhaps this is different for me as an African American, where I think, like, literally, dude, you can't survive this, and the fact that you're here literally means that your ancestors survived slavery. And you can't make it through a day of a few bills behind. No. You in this sense, and again, I can't speak to everybody. I'll speak for what I said to me. You're lying to yourself because you've bought into this idea that life is easy, or that life is easy for some. And that if you just believe God right, that life will be easy. And what I've noticed is that anybody who approaches life as life will be easy tends to fail at life. And what I mean when I say that, I mean the goals that they have at life. It doesn't work very well. Anywhere you want to be, you're going to have to get there. Anything you want to do, you're going to have to do. And it absolutely astounds me that people can find a way to disobey God, to do things that harm their lives, but can't find a way to disobey God to do things that benefit their lives. It's a real issue. And it's not an issue that impacts all branches of Christianity or all branches of believers. But when it comes to believers in my community, I've seen a lot of this. Another thing which kind of ties into this is a lack of attention to the details of reality. So then you're unable to tie the consequences of your choices, your conditions, and your circumstances you're unable to tie your consequences to your choices or to your conditions or to your circumstances. So when you look at, the things that are happening in your life, you're attaching those things. This is either God, or this is the devil, or this is someone praying against me, or this is some angel who didn't do what it was supposed to do, or this is because Venus is in retrograde, or whatever. But none of these things are true, and none of these things are traceable, and none of these things are trustworthy. But if you were actually paying attention to your life, which I've started doing over the past 10 years, it became very clear to me why my life wasn't where I wanted it to be. And it's because I wasn't in the driver's seat of my life. And before you say to me, well, there are plenty of people who get in the driver's seat of their lives and still don't get where they want to be, they're still knocked down by other people. And I would say, if someone else can keep you from going where you want to go, where you want to go is either unrealistic or you don't want it bad enough. And again, this type of mentality does come from some of my ancestors. We're all ancestors of somebody. But people like Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. Frederick Douglass, and you've heard me say it, he says, no man can ride my back unless I bend down and let him do it. One things that I teach in my community just constantly is freedom is a state of mind. It's not something that somebody can give you. If somebody can give you freedom, then you've already made yourself less than. And believe it or not, it's amazing how much our religious thinking plays into that. All right, so I'm almost finished. So there's a lack of attention to the details. So let's just kind of recap. You waste your life in anticipation of another one. You mistreat others in service to the imaginary. You're robbed of personal agency. And here's another one. Nope. Oh, another one was lack of attention to the details of reality. And then the last one, lack of contribution to human progress. This is another thing that really got me, and I think I did share a little bit of this in the video of what shook me out of my silent atheism, is that when I begin to review my church experience and my history in church, which again was over 2 decades, I begin to realize that much of the pastors and the leaders that were my contemporaries were not concerned with human progress. As a matter of fact, in spite of all the data that shows human progress, they didn't believe it was a thing. Because in their mind, humans have not progressed. Humans have fallen. In their minds, our perfected state was when we were having butt naked hug parties with God in Genesis. I like to say it like that. They're more focused on going backwards than moving forward. One of the things that I shared with my wife when we got married is that I'd realized that much of my Christian experience, as far as listening to other preachers, was not only anti-science, it was anti-intellectual. It was anti-human. It was anti-future. So what's the worst that can happen? Aside from everything that I've already mentioned, I think it's a good point to call out that one of the worst things that can happen is that we continuously sacrifice our future because of people who haven't even tried to know better. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for hanging out with me. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification alert bell so you can get notified. Consider joining our community. Consider volunteering. All of these links are in the description, and check out our merch. Thank you so much for hanging out. Until next time, keep rising and stay beautiful. And yeah, stay progressive, because that's the important part. Beautiful is optional, but progressive, let's focus on that. Holla at you.